So today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is how to make chord inversions on a piano. So what is a chord inversion? If you don't know what a chord is at all, I would encourage you to watch my video called How to Make, Play, and Read Chords at the Piano first. But basically I'm going to start with a C chord here, which is the notes C, E, and G. Now to make an inversion out of this, all we have to do is reorder these notes somewhere on the keyboard. So I can take the C that's here and put it up here instead. Notice that it's still a C, an E, and a G, and that's what's called an inversion. It's still a C chord, even though E is now on the bottom. Now there's one other possible order for these notes, and that's if I continue to move E upwards. This is called the second inversion of the C chord. So once you get good at chord inversions, you can move them around the piano, and even if you spread them out, notice that I still have a C, an E, and a G. Now the advantage of doing chord inversions is essentially that they sound smoother. So if I take a chord progression, and this is the one I'm going to teach you, C, G, A minor, and F, which doesn't sound too bad by itself, but if I invert the chords, not only does it sound smoother, but it's physically easier to play, and it's easier to play without looking because all of the notes are closer to one another without jumping around too much. Now mentally it's harder, so we're going to get into that right now. Now if you don't have your piano keyboard labeled with letter names, I used a whiteboard marker, and I explain how to do that in my other video called Understanding the Basics of Music Using a Piano. So I'd encourage you to do that if you're new to this. Okay, anyway, here's our progression for chord inversions that we're going to work with. A C chord, a G chord, an A minor chord, and an F chord. These will all be white keys. You will not play any black keys here. So normally we would play a C chord here with C, the root on the bottom, played by the thumb, or some people when they first start out use a pointer finger, that's fine, or you can even use two hands if it's a stretch for you. G chord, G on the bottom. A minor, again, all white keys, don't let the little M fool you. F on the bottom, good. So I want to start my C chord instead with an E on the top. So basically the way I get there is I invert the chord. I take the G that's up here and I put it down here. So now we have G, C, and E, the same three notes in a different order. So I'm going to write these out vertically. So this one I'm going to write on the bottom. I'm going to use lowercase letters for the individual notes of the C chord. G, C, and E. That's what my thumb, middle finger, and pinky are playing. Now for the G chord, I'm going to end up playing it the same way that we normally would play it, which is called root position, with the root on the bottom. By the way, a reminder that chords are composed of a root, a third, and a fifth. The middle note is called the third. So here's our G chord in regular position. That should be pretty easy. Now for the A minor chord, I want to put the third on top. What's the top? The top is that way on piano. It's the higher notes. Bottom is this way. Here's our root position A minor chord with A on the bottom. So if this middle note, which is called the third, if I want that to be on top, what that means is I can't have anything to the right of it. This E has to go. So where does the E go? Right down here. So we have inverted the A minor chord, E, A, and C. So I'm going to write them out like that. Okay? And last, but not least, we're just going to play the F chord in root position like it normally would be played with an F on the bottom. Now, before I get into the theory behind this, I'm just going to show you how to play it all together. I'm using the pedal to make the chords smoother, the right pedal, which you can't see below me on the piano, and we'll have a separate lesson on the pedal, but without the pedal, there will be a little break in between each chord, but that's okay. Now, what does your left hand do if you want to add left hand to make this sound richer? Well, what the left hand does most of the time is the left hand plays these notes, the roots of the chords, just single notes. So the left hand would play, LH for left hand, would just play a C. Even though the chord has been inverted in the right hand, you're still going to want to play the root of the chord in the left hand. We're going to play it down here. This is what the bass player in the band would be doing. While I play my inversions. Now, a good rhythmic pattern to make a beat out of this, let's say we want the chords to be 2 beats long each. We could just do 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. I'm playing 2 times in the right hand and just 1 time in the left hand. It's always nice if the hands are a little different, and usually the left hand moves slower than the right hand because bass frequencies take a longer time to sound. So this is kind of keeping the beat in your right hand. Now, if that's easy for you to do 2 at once, I would encourage you to try the pattern where we do essentially the right and left hands play together, and then the right hand plays on beat 2, and then the left hand plays shortly after beat 2, technically on the end of beat 2, so we would say 1, 2, and. So that would be the hands are together, and then the right hand plays, and then the left hand plays a little more quickly. Those are 2 8th notes, so we would go like this. 1, 2, and 1, 2, and 1, 2, and 1, 2. Just listen once. That's a common sort of pattern that you can use on the piano to make beats in popular music and other styles. So that's the basics of how to play these chord inversions, and you can invert any chord on the piano any way you like. Now, getting into the theory behind it, part of what sounds so good about chord inversions is that they're smooth. Well, what do I mean by smooth? It's that the individual voices of the chord, the individual notes that comprise the chord, when they move from one chord to the next, don't tend to move very far. So you remember in our first one, we were just doing root position chords before we inverted everything. And so you would have the top note, G, jumping down to a D. It's not bad, but it's not particularly smooth, and all of the voices are moving in the same direction the entire time. So it's a little clunky. You can kind of feel the clunkiness. It's not too bad, but it's not nearly as smooth as this. This almost sounds like a choir. So we have the top note moving from E to D to C to C. Nice and smooth. Middle note is moving from B, C to B to A to A. So those 2 voices together, kind of harmonizing with each other. And then the lower voice starts on a G, stays on a G, goes down to an E, and then back up to an F. And notice in all of these, we have some voices staying between almost all of the chords. This G stays on the second chord. This A and this C stay, going from the 3rd chord to the 4th chord. And here we don't have any we don't have any common notes between these 2 chords, and then we don't have, even though the C is common going from this chord back to the beginning, it's not going to be played in the same voice. But notice how these kind of, we call this oblique motion, where one voice stays and the other voices move. And it kind of makes it sound nice and smooth. These guys are only moving down by step, and then this one's staying. Now everybody moves. This moved down by a small leap, and these guys move down by step. These 2 stay, bottom voice moves up by step. And then back to the beginning, where this F moves up by step to get to the G, and then the A and the C have a small leap up to C and E. So much smoother. When you invert chords, you start to think of chords as more than just a random collection of 3 notes, and you think of them more as individual voices, a soprano, an alto, and a tenor, maybe, if you're thinking in terms of a choir. Or you could think of a flute and a clarinet and a bassoon, or a violin, viola, and cello, however you want to think of those 3 voices. So that's inversions. That's why we do it, and that's a little bit of the theoretical concept behind it. It's the individuality of each of these voices of the chord and making them sound smooth going from one chord to the next. So I hope this helps you with chord inversions.